now that we've created this dog named Sherlock, and we now understand how they are related to the constructor, these inputs, let's create another dog from the same class. This will be a different object. So this is one object that we created from this class, right? We'll create a new object. This new object will also be of dog type. Let's create that object. Let's say this new object's name is Watson. And the object's name is Watson, and that is not the same as this name. This is an attribute of the class, all right? So this new object is Watson, so we'll say new dog, and then we'll give it a name. It could be any other name, it could be anything. Let's say we keep the name Watson, and let's say it's 7 years old. Let's say its color is black, and let's say it's a golden retriever. And this creates a new dog, a new object. So from the same class, at first, we created an object, and that object's name was Sherlock. And this has its own color, this has its own age, this has its own breed, this has its own name, and this can access these methods or these abilities. We created another object named Watson, and this Watson has its separate color, a separate age, its own separate breed, and its own separate name, right? And it can also use all of these methods. So it also has all these abilities or behaviors. Now, when we defined Sherlock, we had this variable that was input. This variable corresponded to this here, right? This variable corresponded to this variable corresponded to this, and this variable corresponded to this. Now, when we were creating Sherlock, this meant Sherlock, all right? So when Sherlock refers to this class, when Sherlock looks at this class and tries to get its attributes or use its methods, this refers to Sherlock. When Watson or this object tries to use this class, when this object uses its methods or abilities or behaviors, and when this object accesses its attributes, at that point, this refers to Watson, all right? So this refers to whichever object we are working with, right? So let's say we call something like Watson.age, right? When we say Watson.age, it comes to the class and this means Watson. So it becomes Watson.name, Watson.age, Watson.color, Watson.breed, right? But when we are talking about Sherlock, let's say we say Sherlock.breed, right? Now Sherlock.breed, whenever we're talking about Sherlock.breed, at that point, this refers to Sherlock. This means Sherlock at that time. So the word this here is used for the object which you are working with currently. Whichever object you're working with currently, this means that object, all right? So I hope the concept of this is clear. I hope you also understand how constructors are made and how we can use these constructors to construct or create new objects. So understand that when we created Sherlock, this was an object that had its own memory space, right? So if this is your RAM, then Sherlock has its own memory space. Everything related to Sherlock, everything related to this object is stored in its own memory space. Everything in this memory space relates to Watson. So Watson has its own memory space. Every object has its own separate memory space. They're just created from this recipe. They're just created from this blueprint. So I hope that part is clear as well. So once again, when we created the object named Sherlock, and we input the different attributes in this constructor, this went here, right? And when it went here, it put Sherlock in input name, it put 8 in input age, it put white in input color, and it put Labrador in input breed. And then it said this dot name means, because we're working with Sherlock now, so this means Sherlock. So for the Sherlock object, which is in this memory location, for the Sherlock object, the name becomes this name that was input here, Sherlock. For the Sherlock object in this memory location, this dot age, so this means the object in this memory location named Sherlock, right? Because we're working with Sherlock right now. So Sherlock dot age becomes input age, which was 8. Then this dot color means Sherlock dot color becomes input color, which is white, and Sherlock dot breed becomes input breed. Now, when we were working with Watson, we input these 4 attributes, right? So now we're working with Watson, and Watson is our current object. Then when this constructor was there in the program, our program came here, and it was like, all right, what is this? This is a constructor of the dog class. Go to that constructor. So it went to this constructor here, and it saw that at first the string was Watson, so it put Watson in input name. Then the integer was 7. It put 7 in this integer input age. Then there's another string, which is black. It put that in the string. And then it put golden retriever here, which it put in this string named input breed. And then this, because we're working with Watson, this means Watson, because this is basically referring to the current object. And the current object is Watson. And Watson is in this memory location, right? So it's like, all right, so the object in this memory location, who we call Watson, that object's name, so Watson's name becomes input name. And now the input name is Watson, right? So this dot name, which is Watson dot name, becomes this string, which is Watson. Watson dot age becomes this integer, which is input age, because this integer was stored here, right? So when the program came from here to here, it took all these attributes and then stored them in these variables here, right? And then these variables were then assigned to these attributes. And these attributes are the attributes that you see here. So now you know how a class can be created. A class has 3 different parts. The first part is where we define its attributes. The second part is the constructor. And the third part is where we define its abilities. Or we can call them behaviors. And these are basically all methods, right? So now you know the different parts of a class. You also know how to create an object from a class. You create an object from a class using the constructor. And you also know that different objects can be created from the same class. And those different objects will reside in different memory locations, and they will have their own sets of all these things that are in a class. Great, so in the next video, we'll go through a coded example of a class, and we'll also go through a concept called overloading. So see you in the next video.